Well, Mrs. Cheever, and I pronounced that correctly, right?
That's right.
And Mrs. Oklahoma Belle Cheever?
That's correct.
It's been some time for you, hasn't it? Here in Oklahoma City, you are actually the first white child born in our big, sprawling city as of now.
That's right.
What did it, back in your childhood? Of course, you were born in 1889, right?
That's right. My folks came from Texas to Oklahoma City on May the 1st. And my father was contractor and builder, and so he had our house all built, and of course they were living in a tent, and they were going to move in the house the next morning, but I was born Sunday evening on May the 19th, and then they didn't get to move in for a while.
Do you recall your mother telling you who the doctor was?
Oh yes, it's Dr. Munger. He's now buried out at Fairlawn Cemetery out here.
It wasn't Cheever at that time. What was the name?
Cunningham was the name. Oklahoma Belle Cunningham.
Do you recall when or the address of the house?
Yes, it's 324 West 3rd Street. And now it's they're using it as a parking lot down. It's right in the same block with the OG&E building.
Quite a change in those days.
Yes, that's right.
Have you watched the progression of Oklahoma City all these years and enjoyed seeing the changes?
Yes, I certainly have. Just numerous buildings going up and changes just in, you'll drive out and just see new things, new buildings at all times.
I know any number of people, and as a matter of fact, to put it on record as far as the voice is concerned, who named you Oklahoma Belle?
Jack Love. He was corporation commissioner here, and one of the finest men I ever knew. This was my father.
A friend of the family?
Yes, he was. He's a friend of my father's.
Well, why specifically did he pick that name? Do you know?
Well, he just said that it should be Oklahoma Belle, because I was the first child born here in Oklahoma City, and that was the name that he wanted to name me.
Well, how did the fact that you were the first white child born here in Oklahoma City affect your parents? Do you recall?
Well, they were certainly proud. They were really proud of me. They tried to show me off to everybody, and
well, before we get into chronological progression as far as your life is concerned, how long did your parents live?
Well, my father passed away in 47, and my mother passed away in 43.
And what was your father?
I mean, 43, and he passed away in sooner than that. Let's see.
Well, it's a little difficult to reach back sometimes.
Well, my mother passed away in October 43.
What were some of your impressions of Oklahoma City as a child?
Well, I just always thought it was the most wonderful city I was ever in, and I've been in quite a number of different cities, all the way from New York City to Los Angeles. And
what are some of the interesting things that happened to you as you grew up with this historical name, so to speak? When did you start to realize it meant something?
Well, they have my picture hanging now in the historical building, and out at the
Historical Society.
Historical Society, that's right. And then they had it out at the library when it was they built this new library on the highway out west, and
now I know also that you're very active as a youngster, so to speak, in the 89ers, right?
That's correct. I've been one of their officers for quite a number of years. And then I was president of the organization in 56 and 57.
Uh-huh.
And at that time, of course, I've been a life member now for, quite a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, when I was president, my son and Mr. Cheever and my sister joined us to be life members. They put there at the time that I was president.
Do you know who originated the club? Do you recall the 89ers?
Well, yes, I have it in one of my books here, but I can't call her name
Well, it
right
is a
now.
matter of record.
Yes, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And Jack Love was one of our presidents in the men's organization.
Mm-hmm.
And then the ladies joined the organization in 1912, and it's been called the the 89ers organization ever since 1912.
You had a lot of interesting things happen to you as a child, and I can see by some of the activities in some of the papers and the old Oklahoma Journal, was it?
Yes,
Back
that's
in
right.
those days, and then the Oklahoma City Times, that there was a beauty contest.
The
let's
journal
see.
had the write-up of my birth in the as the first write-up that they ever had. I think it was May the 24th. A paper came out, and it tells about my birth, and Dr. Munger being my doctor, and being named.
How about this beauty contest?
Well, I believe there were about 6 of us in that contest,
Uh-huh.
and we.
Such, Jenny Bradford says here, and Ruth McCornack. Are any of those people still around today? Do you know?
Well, no, I don't know. There's several of them that I know have passed away, and I don't know whether any of them are
Uh-huh.
alive or not.
You haven't had any contact with them?
No, I haven't.
Mhm.
But in our, I was just noticing that in our organization of the 89ers, they were at one time close to 600 members.
Mhm.
But we don't have that many now by a whole lot. And I have several books here. It tells about my birth and different things.
What are those books, Mrs. Cheever?
Well, now this is a book here. This book here just has a small. It just tells about. It says it was put out by Jenny Locks just recently. She's one of our 89er members,
Mm-hmm.
and it says the year before Oscar left as her brother, my father moved the 2-story house on the back of the lot and built a 4-room apartment brick building. Our family took 2 apartments upstairs, and we felt like royalty. Now we had fireplaces in the living room and modern conveniences. Mama got rid of most of our old furniture and bought new pieces. I remember in my room I had bird's eye maple bedroom suit and a carpet and blue curtains and window shades. You can imagine how very proud I was. The contractor who built this building was Mr. Cunningham, a man who lived in the corner house of our block. He was an 89er who had made the run just like my father. His oldest daughter was named Oklahoma because she was the first child born in the new territory after the opening. I was in one of the books, and then here's a book that tells about gives a list of various different things, and it's I noticed there's about 600 of us members here that are listed, and then here's another book that tells about my birth. It says, first white child born in Oklahoma City. Jefferson W. Cunningham and his wife Mary, hearing thrilling tales of the country that was to be opened to settlement on April the 22nd, 1889, left their comfortable home in Tyler, Texas, and came to Oklahoma on April the 1st, 1889. It was a busy and exciting time for everyone, and a little more so for this young couple. Mr. Cunningham was a contractor and builder, but all the demands for houses of other citizens could not keep him from rushing to the work of his own dwelling at 324 West 3rd. Even at that, on the evening of May the 19th, the baby girl arrived in a tent they used as a temporary home. This was the first baby born in the new town. And the tiny brown-eyed beauty was named Oklahoma Belle by Jack Love, a friend of the beaming father. The house the father had built was ready to move into Saturday night, but Mr. and Ms. Cunningham decided to move on Monday. The baby came on Sunday to prove her right to the name of real pioneer. In those days, things moved so rapidly that there was little time to notice long a birth or death. The citizens, however, paid tribute to the little family and to the first baby, and she was shown off proudly by the young parents to strangers and friends alike. Mr. Cunningham, not contented with his honor of proud father of the first born in the new city, built the first tall building, a 3-story brick structure on the site of the present post office. Miss Cheever, Oklahoma Belle Cunningham, married Mr. L.L. Cheever May the 15th, 1912, and they established a floral shop which bears the name.
By that account, Mrs. Cheever, your father was, he was in the construction business, right?
Oh, yes, he was. Yes, he was.
Well, he actually contributed a great deal then to the growth of Oklahoma City, didn't he?
Well, there's just quite a number of the buildings still standing that he built.
For instance?
Well, now there's one on Grand, or Sheridan, you might call it, which it is, and I believe that's in the 200 block on the south side of the street, and then there's one on Reno, a 4-apartment brick building, and then there's one a little further out in about the 800 block, a 4-apartment brick building, and then there's one where the Central Drive-In Bank, they tore that down to build, tore one of his buildings down to build that, and then there was one right north of that on, I believe that's 6th Street, I believe, or 7th, right on the corner, the same kind of a building. It still stands there. And, well, there's several around different places.
I imagine you had a rather interesting childhood and teenage life, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Some of your compatriots and some of the people with, or rather the people with whom you were raised and the groups, what were some of the activities that kept you teenagers busy?
Well, I don't know, we all seemed to have a nice time always. We were always busy at one thing or another.
The city, how do you assess the magnificent change that has been made in Oklahoma City? Has it always, as you look back, and it's not too many years at that, and we don't mean to imply that, has there always been this drive to keep going?
It certainly has. I know in 1907, why, Mr. Hill of Hill's Business College, he gave me a scholarship to his college, and And then
What happened after that? Did you go to work?
no, I never did. I decided I'd rather stay home than to work, so I never did work out until only work I ever did is when we opened up a flower shop.
How long ago was that?
That was about 1929.
And where was the first Cheever's flower shop?
It was, well, I'd grown flowers nearly all of my life. I just thought it was wonderful to see them growing. And I know when we moved in this brick building on in the 2500 block on West 16th, I had had a lot of peonies in my yard, and so I just couldn't bear to see them go to waste. So we got a lot of candy buckets, great big candy buckets, and what do you call them? 10-gallon candy buckets or something about like that. And so we took these peonies all up and took them up to 16th Street, and we planted them all around in the yard, or just set these buckets all around the yard, and they bloomed the most gorgeous peonies I believe I ever laid my eyes on. And everybody around had to come look and see. They said that I just moved in, had more flowers than anybody, all the rest of them around there. And so then I just kept on growing flowers, and so the church asked me to donate some to their church across the street, the Crestwood Church, and I did. And the neighbors would come in, and I'd give everybody flowers that come around, and so that just led. And then they began to want me to make up some pieces they would come in and want to buy them. And so I thought, well, I'm just in the business. I might as well take the money for it. So that led me then to get into the flower business. And I started in, and first my husband took some flowers out to a florist and said he wanted them to make them up for him. He didn't think I could make them up for arrangements that we had. And so when he brought them back, I said, well, if I couldn't do better than that, I'd take out. And so I began to make them up then, from then on, and we made bouquets to go out to different churches, and we made them for the Oklahoma County Bar Association, and right today I have some of my very best customers are customers that I had at that time, and I could name numerous ones. And for Christmas, some of them come in and ordered. Every Christmas they order great big bouquets and poinsettias and everything like that to go out to all their friends, you know, big orders. And so it just led from that little growing flowers out in the yard. And
you and your husband went into business?
We went into the business.
When were you married to Mr. Cheever?
We were married in 1912. And so he passed away then, and he passed away in 43, and 10 years after that, then I married his brother.
For heaven's sake.
And and but first to go back, there was a reporter came in our place, and so he wanted to get a write-up about me being the first child born in the city, and so he asked if we had any children. So I told him yes, we had just one boy, and that was him in the cradle there. And so he asked what his name was, and or in his little bed. And so I told him, well, he didn't have any name, but we just called him Buster. And he was long about 4.5 years old then, and it just went into it through his mind right then to run a contest, you know, and let the city name him. And
this was when your son was about 4.5.
He was about 4.5 years old.
And you just called him Buster.
We just called him Buster. We couldn't find a name that we thought was good enough for him, and so they run our pictures, my son's picture and my picture. I have that book there, and so they put in several different names, but I think
that was in the Times or the Oklahoman?
It's in the Times.
In
yes.
the Times, that's right.
Yes, and so I think there was about there was more suggested to name him Jack Love after the man who had named me than all the other names put together. And so that's what we did. We named him then. We agreed on the name Jack Love and named him, and so that's how he got his name, Jack Love.
Now that was back in. He was born when?
In 1915.
He was born in 1915. Just so we get these dates correctly, because it's a matter of record and a matter of history.
That's right.
Be sure we get them. I should judge
he was born September the 7th, 1915.
Many interesting things have happened to you during the course of your life, hasn't it?
Oh, that's right. Sure have.
You've received a great deal of recognition, not only locally, but statewide and nationally.
Yes, I've been in quite a few of their different parades here. Let's see, in 1910, where they had a parade that had 6 of the most beautiful horses I believe I ever laid my eyes on. And they were all dressed up with silver harness and silver all around on the harness and big long red tassels and they were the most beautiful carriage. And of course I had on a long dress and was all dialed up with a great big pretty white hat and with a great big ostrich plume on it. And that night, they had a big, the 89ers had their big banquet in the, what's that hotel on the south side of Maine?
On the south side of?
South Broadway and Maine.
Was that the Sheraton?
No, Broadway and Maine.
Huckins?
Huckins.
The Huckins Hotel.
At the Huckins Hotel, and Governor and Ms. Haskell, they led the ball. They led the and Governor or Mr. Johnson, he was supposed to represent the father of Oklahoma, and I was supposed to represent the baby of Oklahoma. So we led behind them, led the grand march, and we certainly had a nice banquet that night.
What other honors have been bestowed on you?
Well,
are they too numerous?
We've had quite a...
Some outstanding, some that stand out in your mind particularly. Sorry.
Well, we've had...
That's all right.
I just can't say just how many we have had. Of course, every year we have the 89ers has a big banquet, and of course taking part in that is something really nice, but we all used to dress in our long dresses, and it really was outstanding.
Have you written a history yourself, or do you have any recorded history that you've put down about the happenings in your life as Oklahoma Belle?
No, I really haven't, only...
except what has been written about
That's
you.
right, just what has been written about me. Prim has a nice write-up there in our Florist magazine. It tells about different items.
When did you move to this location here on 23rd and Hudson?
Well, let's see, we moved here about 32, I believe.
1932?
Was it 32, Jack, we moved here?
Jack? Jack? Was 32 when you moved here?
I'm sure it was 1932.
Go ahead and get whatever you want.
All right.
We're just talking here. That's fine. Huh?
He said 38.
Oh, 38? 1938 then, I guess. Yeah, I guess it was 1938 when we moved to this location. We were down in the hotel in the Brandif building first, after we left our place on 16th Street. And we thought the shop got too large for us out there, so we moved down in the Brandif building. And then we moved in the Hotel Kirkpatrick building,
Mm-hmm.
and we were there about 3 years. Then we bought this place here and moved up here. And,
Looks like you're going to stay here.
That's right. I certainly like it here.
What else can you tell us? What are your impressions that, certainly it's based upon the fact you were the first white child born in Oklahoma City, but, and naturally you can't recall way back then, but then as you grew up, how does the city compare now with when you were a youngster?
Well, of course, we used to not have any paved streets, you know.
And horse and buggies?
That's right. But now these paved streets are really wonderful. It's a great improvement.
And the old streetcars, I should judge?
Yes, old streetcars were. There's for years that after we had them, that I never rode on one because we had our own car. I think the first automobile ride I ever took was in 1907.
You recall with whom?
A real estate man.
Mm-hmm. You recall what kind of a car?
Well, I think it was a Ford car, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
It was a two-seated car, I know, and I'm not real sure as to the make, but I believe it was Ford. And first car we ever owned ourselves was in 1912.
How's the florist business now compared to then, back in those days, when you first started? That was about in 29, was it?
In about 29, yes,
About 29.
it was. Uh-huh.
Well, those were pretty dark days, weren't they?
They sure were, but I don't know. It seemed like we kept pretty busy at that time in the shop. It just seemed like we had about all we could do. But of course now, and my son has always helped us.
Mm-hmm.
That's about all he has ever done is work here in the shop. Only when he was out here at Tinker about 3 years, he was out there. And
many times people will see that Cheever's Flowers, Oklahoma Belle, and even natives here who came as of recent vintage, and they wonder, what does that name mean? What does she mean by Oklahoma Belle?
I've had that question asked me many a time, and of course I belong to the FTD, National Association, and I get that question from them very often.
I should judge it hasn't done you any harm in the business throughout the years.
No, I don't think so. I think
well,
the name Oklahoma, I just couldn't have been named anything better, I don't think.
We want to thank you for your part in this Living Legend Library, Mrs. Cheevers, and it'll be a permanent record at Oklahoma Christian College, there for all time from now on in. It's almost like putting it in a time capsule, because this tape, the master of this tape will be in a vault and be there for you to listen to, or anyone that you wish to have listened to. But it'll be used as the basis of research and historical, as a historical document for workshops and for school activities, and for anyone else who may wish to listen to it. We thank you very much.
Well, I want to also say that my son was president of the 89ers year before last.
Oh, he was?
Yes, and he was our of course, Jack Love was president years ago in the men's of the 89er, and then we haven't had a man president since 1912 until year before last. My son, they put him in as president, and he sure made a good one for us, if I do say it.
January 24th, 1970, and we are recording at the Oklahoma Hotel. This interview is with Mr. Ed Livermore, the Popa Herald, and Mr. Livermore is here for the annual winter convention of the Oklahoma Press Association. Mr. Livermore, let's start right off with a little bit about yourself and your background. Where were you born, and tell us something about your early childhood.
I was born in 1918 in Hobart, Oklahoma, and lived there throughout my growing up years. The fact of the matter, my mother is still alive and living in Hobart, and at this time she is approaching her 90th birthday. My parents came to Kiowa County at the opening in August of 1901, and my mother has lived there since that time. My father passed away in 1958.
What kind of a home did you have in your childhood?
Well, we had a typical Western Oklahoma home. We were on the right side of the track, but we never had any extra money. I grew up at a time when most families had an automobile, yet I learned to drive an automobile when I was 21 years old. My parents never had one, and we had a very enjoyable family life. I have a brother who, there were two boys, and he's still alive and in Fort Worth, Texas. But our early years were typical rural Oklahoma, you might say. We didn't lack for any of the necessities of life, but by the same token, we were not overburdened with what to do with any of our money.
You didn't have to worry about too many luxuries.
Correct.
What about your schooling? Did you go to school there?
I graduated from high school in Hobart in 1936, and then I went to the University of Oklahoma and got a job in a print shop in Norman to help defray my expenses through the university. Prior to that, I started working as a printer's devil on the Hobart Democrat Chief in 1928, I believe it was. At that time, I think I was 10 years old.
Can you explain what a printer's devil is?
Well, a printer's devil is someone who just, some kid normally, you can't do that anymore due to child labor laws, but there's always a need for some kid around a print shop, or it was at that time anyway, to run errands, to carry metal to the melting pot, to perhaps skim off the top or the dross on the melting pot, to wash up type forms, to do any one of 100 different odd jobs around the print shop, and in the process thereof to learn the type case so that the handset type can be thrown back. That's usually the job of a developing printer's devil. First thing, you learn, among other things, the type case, and then as the paper is killed out, why, it's your job to throw the handset type back into the type case. And that is primarily what I started out doing. I was about 10 years old at the time.
When you start to set type, you take it out of the case, and then you really learn the process in reverse by putting
That
it
is correct. Of course, it would take a journeyman or a topographer to take it out of the case and to properly set it and position it and space it. And that's a problem, and of course the printer devil was not faced with. And so that's the reason that they could use just a printer's devil for the job.
What was the next activity you participated in as far as newspapers are concerned?
Well, I stayed there in that job, and I recall one particular instance, after I'd been there a short while. I believe this was in the fall of 1928. Why, in addition to other kindred duties, I had to sweep the front office out at night. And I believe it was along in August or September of 1928, while along about 6 o'clock in the evening, I was up front sweeping out the office, and the publisher at that time, his name was Everett Pate. He was a pioneer newspaperman there in Hobart, and he was busy over in his office. Most everybody, in fact everybody else in the front office had gone home, and I just had a wide open front office actually, and his desk, he was at his desk, and the door opened, and a couple of gentlemen came in, and they asked if Mr. Pate was there, and I, being in the front office, why, I told them yes, that's his office right over there. And it was an open office, and of course you could hear voices, and you could hear a conversation, and one of these gentlemen said, "Well, Everett, we came in here to buy your newspaper." And I heard Mr. Pate, my boss, say, "Well, Gene, I'm very sorry, it's just not for sale." And the next thing it was said, one of the voices said, "Well, we're prepared to offer you $70,000 for it." And Mr. Pate said, "You just bought it." It was a very quick and final contract of a sale. It was made right then and there. He apparently one moment had no idea of selling it, and I think he was sincere in that, but he probably had no idea that the man who wanted to buy it was willing to pay the money he did. Well, anyway, this was the first purchase of a newspaper in western Oklahoma by a person who has since become quite prominent in the person of Eugene C. Pulliam. Now owns the papers in Indianapolis, Indiana, and also in Phoenix, Arizona, and also Lebanon, Indiana. And I think he also was the founder, one of the founding fathers of Sigma Delta Chi. He's getting on up in years, but has had a very illustrious and prominent life in newspapering here in the United States. But he came down to Oklahoma in, apparently, as I have learned in later years, in about 1928, and went to one of the banks in Tulsa and borrowed a large sum of money. I've heard it ranged all the way from $250,000 to $1 million on his Lebanon, Indiana newspaper properties, as the story goes, with the idea in mind that he was going to buy up small dailies in Oklahoma. And he was, I understand, a Republican, and perhaps this helped him get the money from a Republican-oriented bank in Tulsa. Well, to make a long story short, he later then proceeded to buy newspapers at Mangum and Clinton and El Reno and Alva and Altus, and I believe that's about all here in Oklahoma. And this was not, he came in right on the doorstep of the Depression, and this was not a very profitable venture, and I think that the Nance McBride chain that was formulated during the mid-30s and early 40s in Oklahoma was an outgrowth. They purchased the vast majority of these newspapers from Pulliam at somewhat lesser figures than he had paid. And that particular incident I remember as being somewhat significant in my early years there. I stayed on the Hobart Democrat Chief, working as a printer's devil at night and after school. 4th of July in 1935, we had a circulation manager, and at that time I had been around long enough, worked summers, to where I was not perhaps a finished printer, but as printers were defined in those days. Surely a finished printer as they're defined in present day, but anyway, I was working in the job department, or the job shop, commercial printing department of the newspaper. And on the 4th of July of 1935, the circulation manager got drunk and disappeared. And if he ever returned, I was never advised of it, because to this day I haven't seen him. But the next day, why, the publisher of the paper, a man by the name of McAvoy, it was owned by Pulliam still, came back and asked me if how I'd like to be in charge of the circulation department. Well, I told him I thought that'd be all right, and so I that day became circulation manager of that little daily out there in western Oklahoma, and put down my type apron and moved up with folks in the front office. And
you were rather young at that time.
I was 15 at that time, and later was advised by National Magazine Circulation Management, which I presume has since gone by the board. I haven't seen a copy of it in recent years. That I, at that time, was the youngest circulation manager of a daily newspaper in the United States. Of course, it wasn't a very impressive job. It was a small country daily newspaper in a very isolated and sparsely settled section of Oklahoma.
What was your circulation at that time?
Circulation of the newspaper, I will recall, was, believe it or not, they had about 800 mail subscriptions, and they had a grand total of 600 in the city. And this was in a town of whose population was 5,000. We had 800 mail and 600 city. And I, after I'd been there for about 30 days, well, I went in to see the publisher one day, and I told him that, I beg your pardon, they had 500. They had 500 in the city. And I told him that he was still thinking, of course, of hiring a grown or an adult circulation man, and I told him to leave that job with me for another 30 to 45 days. I believe I could put him on 100 circulation. And he said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make a deal with you that if you can do that, well, I'll just leave you on the job, and I think I would have been a senior the next year, and I think you can probably go to school and handle these carrier boys and then work in the summer on the rural routes. And so I did it and went to work, and within about 2 weeks, we had 150 new subscribers. And so I got the job on a permanent basis at that time. This was along in 1935, in August, I believe it was, of 1935, whenever I felt somewhat secure in that position.
What technique did you use to get those new subscribers?
Just door to door, and selling them. And went right with the boy who delivered the route, and we just door to doored it. And then before I left the paper, they had a few over 900 circulation a year later in town. Now, in the rural route, I worked the summer after my senior year, and we put on about a couple of hundred out in the rural area. But when I went to school, OU in the fall of 1936, they had a few over 900 subscribers in the city there at Hobart.
Did you have any difficulty making the decision to leave the paper and go to school?
Sure did. Of course, like I said, my parents were of very modest means, and believe it or not, my salary was $9 a week. This was in 1936. I got out of high school, and my salary was $9 a week, and that in western Oklahoma, that was a pretty good salary. Now, there were other places of Oklahoma that weren't really touched by the Depression, but out there, it was all agriculture, and prices had just absolutely gone to pot, and I was making $9 a week, and I wanted to go to OU. And my parents, I wanted to go to college, and OU was about as close as any of them. And I wanted to study journalism. I'd already made up my mind to that. And I decided that I wanted to get into the country newspaper business. I had made up my mind to that. And, of course, the only journalism school that was close by was over at Norman. And the publisher of the paper tried to talk me out of going to college. Said he ought to stay there and be a circulation manager, and it wasn't necessary to go to college, even though he himself was a college graduate. And it was somewhat of a hard decision for me to make. My parents wanted me to, they thought I was right in wanting to go to school, but living at home and with $9 a week, I was contributing to the family income. And also, my older brother had gone on to school ahead of me, I might point out, and I was contributing a little bit of money to keeping him. He was over at Norman, and he was working his way through school, and I was contributing a stipulated amount of about anywhere from $10 to $15 a month to him as well to stay in school. I had done that during my senior year, and I presumed I would do the same thing if I stayed there. But anyway, the word got around that I was going to leave, And it made quite an impression on me when about a week before I left, and I had already given my notice to leave on the 1st of September, but I could have been talked out of it probably. Why, at least a dozen men came in and applied for my job. And they were men around town who were delivering groceries and things like that with families. And that's just how short jobs were. And this impressed me that if I was going to ever get ahead, I was going to have to get me an education, and I was going to have to get out of western Oklahoma. And so that helped me go ahead, and in the meantime, I had secured a job as a printer in a plant over there in Norman, sufficient to keep me in school. It looked like I could stay in anyway. And so I left, went to OU.
When you were in western Oklahoma in the early 30s, of course you lived through the Dust Bowl days. Can you recall any unusual experiences, or tell us a little bit about life at that time?
Well, in looking back on it, I think it probably was about as unpleasant a life as a person could experience. At the time, I really didn't think too much about it because I had never been any place, and I just presumed that it was Dust Bowl everywhere. And to a great extent, it was actually throughout the Southwest. But nevertheless, I recall many times along about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it seemed like these dust storms would always come up. They'd start about 10 o'clock in the morning. You could see them coming on the horizon. And by 1 or 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they were always at their greatest intensity. And I know many times in Hobart, in the afternoon at 3 o'clock, you'd have to turn on lights. You couldn't even see across the room inside a house. Cars had to burn lights. The street lights went on. And the dust just filtered in a way there was no way you could keep it out.
What methods did the housewives use to try to keep the dust out of the home?
My mother used to take old clothes that we had outgrown or that were worn out, and she'd cut them up into strips, and she'd raise the window and then close the window down on these clothes. And then she'd take a knife and poke other clothes in around the other 3 sides of the sill, every window in the house, and try to keep it out as best you could. But there was just seemingly no way, in our house anyway, it was sort of loosely constructed, there was no way you could keep the dust out. And I also remember, as far as the newspaper's concerned, they had a web press down there, which incidentally I lost a finger in while I was circulation manager. I also doubled back there as pressman whenever they needed a little extra help, and I lost a finger in that press. The press is still out there at Hobart. But I know we'd go to press in the afternoon, and whenever we'd have one of these dust storms, which were quite frequent, and well, throughout the year as a matter of fact, but most frequent in the spring, that it was quite a sight due to static electricity to see the electrical charge play back and forth across the web on the press. And I have thought of that so many times. If that were to be seen today, or if an inspector from an insurance company were to see that sort of thing going on now, he'd have a heart attack. But it was just common knowledge, and it was a common occurrence every day that we had a dust storm on. They'd start that press up, and then the static electricity from the dust that was in the air that would play off of this paper as it went through the press would produce this electrical, well, I guess you might call it an electrical charge. Anyway, it was a spark, looked like a sparkler almost, just dancing across that, back and forth across the web. And whatever kept that building from burning down or that press from catching on fire, I'll never know, because, well, it's just a mystery to me, realizing the precautions we take today.
You never experienced anything like that without the dust storm? It took the dust storm to get the spark?
Always, yes. Oh, yes, it was, that was a direct cause of it, was the dust storm.
And the dust filtering into the building have any effect on the efficiency of the machinery?
Oh, yes, the linotypes, I know that they used to keep a big blower on the linotypes, and they'd have to blow them off 2 and 3 times a day during a dust storm. And they, of course, the efficiency of the linotypes, well, they were so inefficient that they couldn't even be tolerated in this day and time. But, of course, that was back at a time when a journeyman printer was making $25 to $30 a week, and then hoped that the check that he drew would clear the bank. And time was not of the importance. People came to work at, I remember the shop, printers came in anywhere from 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, and they worked until 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. And if the machinery didn't work, well, they just came to work a little bit earlier the next morning. And but we couldn't anyway put up with the inefficiency today that was just rampart, whether it was a dust storm or not during those days.
Did the dust storms change the way of life? I know a lot of people left during that time, abandoned farms and things like this. But did the daily routine of life change very much?
Definitely. We, for example, my mother, whenever they had a dust storm, my mother always, we used to eat fried potatoes for supper practically every night. Fried potatoes and Heinz ketchup. I grew up on those 2 items. We had meat every Sunday. But during the old Depression days, why, my mother would either make mush or fried potatoes every night. And usually we'd put ketchup on either. And when the dust storm was coming, why, she always tried to have dinner early. And then as soon as she got the kitchen cleaned up, why, she'd put everybody to go to bed. Kids and everybody. Because it was just so darn uncomfortable that it was just a very poor existence. Just if you went to bed, you went to sleep. And I know we had some little real fine netting type of a thing that we would put over our face at nights if the dust was still churning. Now, of course, so often, see, the dust would it'd come up about 10. You could see it on the horizon about 10 o'clock in the morning, and then she'd get going real good by about 1, 2, 3, or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then usually, and it was always accompanied by wind, naturally, and the wind would die down at dusk. And then when the wind would die down, well, then shortly thereafter, I mean within 30 minutes to an hour, it seemed as though the dust would filter out of the air and settle where it would just start settling on everything, and then maybe by 9:30, 10 o'clock, why, the air would be a lot clearer than it was at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, that's the way I remember it, anyway. But I know whenever we was going to have a bad dust storm, my mother always tried to have dinner early. And everybody, as soon as they ate, why, sometimes sit around. And we didn't have a radio. In fact, when I came home from college, why, I brought a radio one time with me. But we didn't have anything else to do, so we just went to bed.
Did that dust drift and settle like the snow does, and was there any problem in keeping streets open and keeping...
Well, I don't recall keeping streets open as such in town. Now, I know in the rural areas, and I used to go out hunting a lot of times on Sunday and that sort of thing, and in the rural areas, of course, for years, I guess, the dust was just, it practically would cover a fence post, and it would drift clear out across the country road. And right out, the dust would practically keep the road and the fence post just covered up. And it would depend upon how much the road was used as to whether or not it remained open. A number of roads I can remember out in Kiowa County that there wasn't any traffic on them, and they were just permitted, they just filled up solid with dust and just clear up to the fence post. A number of places that way, and they just were section lines that had been open and they just closed up. They were just closed during the Dust Bowl days, and remained that way, I presume, until, well, I guess the war came along. Why, land became more valuable, and they had some new agricultural programs that control the way people use the land and that sort of thing.
When you went to OU, you worked in the print shop, and you majored in journalism. Did your brother major in journalism also?
No, he went to the School of Engineering. He went to the School of Engineering, and then he got his degree there, and went to work with the National Supply Company in about 1937, I believe it was, and then stayed there until he had a reserve commission, was called into the Army. He was called in early, 1940. He was mobilized. He was up in Ohio and was mobilized with an Ohio National Guard outfit, I believe it was, a reserve outfit, early in 1940, I think it was, before World War II started.
When you were in school, were you on the school newspaper?
Yes, I stayed that first year. I continued as a printer throughout my freshman year, and while I was back at Hobart, incidentally, I had picked up some experience selling advertising. Joe McBride, who later was one of the owners of Nance McBride newspapers, was the advertising manager there, and Bob Breeden, who is now the director of parks here for an industry here in Oklahoma, was also one of the advertising men. And those two fellows started me out when I was in high school, selling advertising, making layouts. And so when I got down to Norman, in my freshman year, I got a job selling advertising for a weekly paper in Norman for a while, in addition to working in the print shop. And then I came into my sophomore year, and I got a job collecting cleaning for a cleaning shop down there on the commission, and also selling advertising for a magazine in Norman, and also doing some other things that helped keep me in. And then at the last part of my sophomore year, I started selling advertising on the school newspaper, the Oklahoma Daily. And then when I came back from my junior year, they made me business manager of the Oklahoma Daily, and I held that job during my junior and senior years. Fact of the matter, the last 9 months that I was at OU, I made about $125 a month. This was in 1939 and 40 on that job, and that was more money than I made I made more money in the last 9 months I worked on that school newspaper than I did the first 12 months after I got out of college.
What were you doing the first 12 months out of college?
Well, I went to Anadarko. Joe McBride, whose name I mentioned earlier, as the ad man, one of the ad men out there at Hobart, had by this time formed a partnership with Jim Nance down at Purcell, and they had started taking over some of these newspapers that Pulliam had purchased. They had turned out to be something less than financial bonanzas, and so he just practically turned them over to him to turn the newspapers over to these gentlemen, and they started operating them and buying them. And so one of the papers that he had purchased was at Anadarko, and so when I got my degree, I went to work at the Anadarko paper as an advertising salesman at $100 a month. And the spring of 1940, in the 1st of June, 1940.
How long were you there on that paper?
Well, I stayed at Anadarko until I was drafted in July of 1942. Well, actually, I volunteered in, I guess it was March of 1942, but I wasn't called. I volunteered just ahead of the draft, I might add. And I didn't get called, didn't actually go in until July of 42, and I stayed there. And during that time, I took over the job as advertising manager of the Daily News. And then, of course, I resigned it when I went into the service in July 1942. And I stayed in the service from 1942 until, I guess it was April of 1946. I finally got home and went back to the Anadarko Daily News as advertising manager, and then I stayed there until Labor Day of 1947. At which time, my boss, Joe McBride and Jim Nance, and I went up to Claremore and bought two weekly newspapers, the Claremore Progress and the Rogers County News, and put them together